Hi class, first and foremost, I just want to take the time to welcome you to the course. Public speaking is such a great course for students to take because it's so applicable to our everyday lives, both as professionals and also just in our personal lives as well. So today we are beginning our lesson one, lecture one recording. And if you do have any questions at all after you watch this recording, you can, of course, as always, reach out to me in the course using the email feature. I'm always happy to answer any questions that you have or just clarify the content as a whole. So we're going to go ahead and jump in. But I want to start off with a question for you. Who do you think of as a great speaker? I know that that's going to vary from person to person, but I just kind of want you to keep someone in mind for just a second. Now, I have obviously a few examples on the screen here, but I want you to think about that person you have in mind as a great speaker. They don't have to be famous. They can be someone you know personally, just, whoever you feel like is a good speaker. Now I want you to think about why do you think they are a good speaker? Well, that's going to vary from person to person as well, but perhaps it's just that they seem well rehearsed, well researched, they seem confident, they are able to both deliver the words they speak as well as the nonverbal messages they present in a consistent and just, overall great delivery pattern. So we all have that in mind as who a great speaker is, and we're going to learn the intricate parts of how to become a great speaker in this class. There are skills behind this, there are techniques and so forth. You may not be born a natural public speaker, and very few people are. So the techniques and the skills that we're going to learn in this class are really going to help you along the way just to become better at your public speaking skills. So with that in mind, I know this is a common question from a lot of my students that I hear them ask each other or even have asked me, but why do people of all majors and programs have to take this course? Why do students at the collegiate level, why do they have to take public speaking? Well, for a variety of reasons. Pretty much no matter what field you go into, you're going to be using public speaking in one way or another. If you're going into the medical field, you're going to be using public speaking skills with your patients, with fellow colleagues, with just administrative staff and so much more. Let's say that you're going into the business world. Well, you're going to again use public speaking skills with colleagues. You're going to be using your public speaking skills to connect with and possibly even gain clients. So no matter what field you go into, you're going to use this. If you're going into the field of education to become a teacher or something like that, then you're going to use public speaking skills to talk to your students, to talk to parents, and again, to talk to administrative staff and so forth. So that's why people of all majors and programs need to take this course. And aside from your career, you'll also be using public speaking skills in your personal lives as well. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But that's why this class is so important to you personally, your career, your professional life. It's very applicable and it's something that you have to use a great deal, so why not be good at it? Okay, practical benefits though. Through this class, you'll develop a lot of numerous basic skills, things that you might have thought that you knew or that you were executing how you felt comfortable, but we're going to take that to a next level. We're going to make you even better at those skills. You'll become more successful in your career. Communication skills are vital to progress in your career, and without such, I feel that a lot of employees are reaching a glass ceiling, so to speak. So we want to make sure that you are able to go as far as you personally can in your career by having the skill set to do so. And you're just going to become a more effective communicator as a whole, both in your professional and personal life, like I've already discussed. Okay, public speaking can help you learn a great deal. It can help you to control your communication anxiety. That's that really anxious, nervous feeling that we sometimes get when we even hear the word public speaking. Now, with that being said, I think it's important to point out that I, as your instructor, understand that public speaking is the #1 fear of most people. Not all people, but most people. So that's always taken into consideration. Just know that you're not alone with that. You're not the only person in the class that has a fear of public speaking. In fact, most of my students come into the course with a little bit of communication anxiety. Some come in with a great deal of communication anxiety, and that's okay too. Now, we're also going to learn how to present yourself at your best. as we all know, first impressions are so vital, and that's why it's important that you're able to have the communication skills that is going to make that great first impression with other people. We're also going to learn how to read an audience and adapt your message. We can't simply, public speaking is not simply constructing a speech and using that same speech on any audience that you can. We have to learn how to read an audience and adapt our message to that audience in order to productively reach the listener. We're also going to learn how to develop ethical sensitivity. And that's something that we'll go over a little bit later in the course, but something that is very important, especially in today's globalized society. We will also learn how to select subjects or topics that listeners feel are vital and fascinating. We never want to create a speech that is not dynamic. And what I mean by that is we can take even the most, for lack of a better word, boring subjects and make them fun. And I'll show you how to do that in the course as well. We're going to learn how to conduct responsible research, how to design, structure, and outline a message to really accomplish the goal that you're seeking to accomplish. There is a design process that I'm going to teach you in this course that's going to really help you on how to properly construct your speeches. And it's actually a design process that you could use on research papers or essays or so forth as well. We'll learn how to use presentation aids effectively. Believe it or not, that's not something that naturally comes to people. We'll learn the techniques and so forth on how to properly use presentation aids. We'll learn how to manage our language so that our words work for us rather than against us. And this is very important in not only our professional lives, but our personal lives as well. Managing our language and learning how to use language in a way that is conducive to the situation, the environment, your audience, and so much more can really be beneficial to you as a person. We're going to learn how to express our ideas in front of an audience or even in private with power, with confidence, and with passion. And of course, we'll also learn how to speak informatively, persuasively, and ceremonially. There will be times in your life when you will need to give out some form of information, and that's going to be informative speaking. There'll be other times that you're seeking to make a change or persuade people or even advocate for something, and that's going to fall under persuasion speaking. And then, of course, there's going to be times in your life where you'll have to speak in a ceremonial manner, and that could be things such as giving a wedding toast. Unfortunately, it could also mean giving a eulogy. There's just so many things that would fall under. And I think that that's important for my students to learn because we all move through phases of life, and we're all going to have certain situations in which we will have to speak in a special occasion manner. So it's important that you learn how to do that as well. So how can learning effective speech techniques make you a more powerful and successful person? Well, I think that's a great question. Like I said, when we learn how to communicate effectively, we gain power in that. We become more successful in that because we're able to better communicate with others, we're able to better connect with others, and we're able to really arrange our message in a way that's easily understood. Here's another great thing that I like to point out here. Did you know that according to the National Association of Colleges and Employers, effective communication skills were listed as one of the major things employers look for when hiring and promoting? In fact, as someone who is a business owner, I own 2 businesses and have worked in the business world for quite some time, I can tell you that there have been several times in my career in which I have chosen the candidate that was a better communicator versus the one that had the absolute most experience, because I felt that the person that had the better communication skills would make a better fit for my companies. So this is, this isn't something that's just passive, and it's not something that necessarily comes natural. It does take technique, it does take skill, and it does take a lot more things that we'll discuss in this course. You can, as I've stated, be more effective in your life and your career when you have these great skills. With that in mind, I want you to think about this. Have you ever entered into a situation in which you needed to introduce or inform or persuade or even demonstrate? Of course, we all have. Now, were you effective in that situation? Well, you might be thinking, well, some, not so on others. that's what this course is going to teach you. It's going to show you how you were effective that few times that you were effective, and it's going to show you also how you were ineffective the other times and how you can move past that to be effective, I'd say at least 99% of the time. So effective public speaking skills can help you present yourself and your ideas effectively while also being an effective listener. A lot of people don't really think about listening in terms of public speaking, but it's just as important to be able to be a good communicator as it is to be a good listener. Now, being an effective communicator can help you with a lot of different things, but that we've already discussed, but it'll help you to learn more about yourself as a whole. It'll help you to put together speeches on topics that you care about. It's always important to choose a topic that you care about because you won't mind researching the speech quite so much if you have an interest in the topic. Also, you'll probably be more passionate about the topic, which will show in your delivery because you've chosen something that you do care about. You will explore your own interests and values. You'll expand your knowledge as a whole, and you'll be able to develop your own voice. Now, we'll also learn that there is more to effective public speaking than just standing up and speaking. A lot of times students come into public speaking courses and I'll hear them say, well, I'm already great at public speaking because I don't have a problem standing up in front of people and talking. Well, that's not exactly public speaking. That's more of standing up in front of people and talking. Public speaking is so much more than that. Public speaking has history. What do you think I mean by that? Well, I've got a few examples here on the screen. The bottom one says the history of the human race is filled with great speakers who have had a tremendous impact on the world. For example, on March 23rd, 1775, Patrick Henry gave the famous Liberty of Death speech. His famous phrase, "Give me freedom or give me death," had a great impact on our society as a whole. In fact, you still hear people using that quite a good bit. So the history of public speaking can also be traced back to, the Hebrews, the Greeks, the Romans, all of those different societies. So public speaking has history. Also, public speaking requires a certain form of organization. And again, in this class, I'm going to teach you how to organize your speeches. But it does require that it has organization. Because without that organization, you do not sound as fluid, you do not possess a good flow, and you risk miscommunications, misinformation, and so much more. Public speaking also requires a great deal more formality than normal conversational speaking. So we kind of have to know our audience on that one and decide what level of formality we decide to take, but we always want to possess a professional tone when we are speaking to others, especially in the public speaking environment. We also want to make sure that our purpose is clear. We want to make sure that we're always clear and understanding of the goal we have in mind with our speech. So be clear with your purpose, all while being interesting, because no one wants to listen to a speech that's not interesting, right? And I'll show you how to do those things as well in your speeches. The other personal benefits of learning public speaking skills is that they will allow you to expand your cultural and diversity horizons. Audiences are so diverse in nature, and we have to keep those things in mind when we create our speeches. So we all come from different, we all possess different races or different religions. We come from different cultures and different backgrounds. And that doesn't have to necessarily be something that we see as a negative thing. Of course not. It should be something that we see as a positive thing. We can teach each other. We can learn from each other, and that's a wonderful thing. Breaking barriers is another thing that we will learn in this course. We want to strive to avoid ethnocentrism. And ethnocentrism is the tendency of any nation, race, religion, or group to believe that its way of looking at and doing something is the best way and all others have less value. And we'll go over that a little bit more at a different time. Stereotypes. We want to try to avoid stereotypes as well. Stereotypes are just generalized pictures of a race, a group, a gender that supposedly represents its characteristics. And again, those are terms that we're going to really dissect a little bit later on. Public speaking is also an interactive process, and I will show you what that means in just a second. But public speaking is an interactive process, so it's not just standing up and speaking, as I previously noted that students sometimes think. Public speaking, by definition, is a speech that is part of the interactive process that attempts to do some work on a specific occasion, and that specific occasion could be to introduce the speaker to listeners, to possibly share knowledge with them, to convince them of the rightness or wrongness of something, or to advocate for something even, or just to celebrate with them some special moment, occasion, or even an event. So if public speaking is part of the interactive process, what is the interactive process? Well, the interactive process can best be shown with this diagram, I think. I have right here the definitions of these things, but I think it's best to show you what I mean here. The interactive process is something that is communication in itself. With the interactive process, we have an encoder and we have a sender receiver, as we have here. The sender is going to be the person that's conveying the message. And then we have the receiver, and that's going to be the person that's taking in the message. So let's perhaps see these things on the screen and really kind of make the connection here and connect what I'm going to explain. But let's say that we have someone that says, I'm trying to think of something here. Let's say that someone says, hey, how are you doing today? Or better yet, hey, Jane, what are you doing later? Well, Jane is going to, well, first we have the sender that's sending that message. And that message could be, how are you? You know, how are you? How are you feeling today? Whatever. That is the message. And then we have the channel that the message is conveyed through. And here that channel is just going to be a verbalized way of saying this message. Well, the receiver then hears the message, decodes it. What I mean by decoding is they take the time to process what the sender is telling them, because we have to decode what that message means first. And then we are able to respond with our message as well. Fine, thank you, is what it says here. That's going to be the feedback channel. All of this is going on within a physical context. Let's say they're in a elevator, for instance. Well, that's the physical context. The noise that you see there is going to be two different types of noise that are part of the interactive process, and that's going to be internal noise and external noise. An example of internal noise would be if the receiver is thinking in their mind, or better yet, singing a song in their mind, because we sometimes get songs stuck in our mind, and that might be some form of internal noise that's going on that could even hinder communication as a whole. An example of external noise is going to be, let's say, the hum of an air conditioner or car horns, or, well, they're in an elevator, so let's say it's going to be the loud noises of the elevator, the beeping of the buttons as they, rise up or down the floors. So that's going to be examples of external noise. Okay, but like I said, I understand that public speaking anxiety is a real thing. And I know that a lot of people do experience that. So that's something we're going to work through in this course. We want to work to start developing skills to overcome that anxiety. If you possess that anxiety, it doesn't mean that it has to rule over you. Believe it or not, many, many, many years ago, I had public speaking anxiety as well. And that's something that I've worked on for quite some time. And with that being said, I now don't have any communication anxiety when I'm in a classroom full of students delivering a lecture. It's just not something that affects me anymore. And I'm not saying that all of you are going to reach the point where you absolutely are not affected by it at all. That may take several years of really working through that. But I can guarantee you by the end of this course that you will have the skills and techniques to use to help better manage your anxiety. So when you create your speech, you want to first consider the audience and the setting. You want to try to tailor your message in a way that best fits and suits those things. When you choose a topic, you want to choose a topic that's relevant to your listeners, that you have enough information on or can obtain enough information on, that reveals new ideas to the audience and is not just repeating common knowledge. You want to make sure that you are conveying something that's new to them. That's going to keep them interested. You also want to consider your audience's sensibilities and abilities. You don't want to deliver a speech that's overly technical to an audience that is um, not understanding of those things. And also, try out your ideas on other people. Ask other people's opinions. Hey, what if you had to listen to a speech on this? Would it be something that interests you? It might could be a good way to start to think about and choose topics. After you choose a topic, you want to identify your purpose. And we're going to talk about how to do these things later on, but what you want to do is identify your general purpose, your specific purpose, and then your thesis statement. These three things work really well because they help us to better keep our message focused throughout the design process. And then after that, you want to gather speech materials for support. Another important thing I want to note here is that your textbook recommends thinking of your speech as an act of communication to help deal with that nervousness. And when we think about it in those terms, it kind of brings that anxiety level down just a little bit for us. So I told you early on that I was going to tell you about the design process for speech making, and something that you could also use in essays and research papers and so forth. Now, there are 3 parts to a speech, just like there are 3 parts to an essay or something along those lines. We have the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. The problem is, in a lot of college courses, students know that they need an introduction, a body, and a conclusion, but they just don't know how to construct those things. I know a lot of times students will come to me and say, I know what I want to discuss in my speech. I just don't know where to start. How do I start the speech? Well, this is going to be really simple and something that's going to help you drastically in this course, as well as in your other courses as well, and even in your career and life as a whole. In the introduction, you always want to start off with an attention getter. You'll also hear it referred to as an attention grabber. An attention getter can be a story, a quote, a question. Either it can be a participatory question or a rhetorical question. A fact or a statistic is a great way to grab the attention of the audience. You never want to start a speech with, "Hi, my name is, and today I'm going to talk about." That is not a way to grab your audience's attention. And research shows that if we do not grab the audience's attention right off in the introduction, we're going to lose them as a whole. And we don't want to do that. So stories, quotes, questions, facts, and statistics work quite well for attention getters. And then from here, we're going to preview the main points. So after you give us that quote or go over the questions that by show of hands, how many people in here are organ donors? Or, did you know that according to the American Heart Association, 200,000 people a year are diagnosed with heart disease? Those are great ways to open a speech. So kind of keep that in mind. From here, you're going to preview the main points. That's why today I want to talk about the being more aware of heart disease and understanding what it is, knowing the signs and symptoms of such, and you see where I'm going with that. So that's previewing your main points. From here, you're going to lead into the body of the speech. And the body of the speech is really simple. It just contains your main points that you pointed out in your introduction and the support for those main points, which is going to be research, examples, testimony, things like that you're using to support your great ideas. So main points and support. In every speech, you're going to have between 2 to 5 main points, just something to keep in mind there. And then after you do that, you're going to reach the conclusion of your speech. And the conclusion is going to be where you transition to your conclusion. You can do this with a simple in conclusion, to conclude, something along those lines, just to show your audience as a signpost that this is where you are in your speech. From here, you'll summarize your main points, basically tell them what you told them to solidify that information in your listener's mind. And then you're going to end with a memorable statement. Memorable statements are actually just like attention getters, just at the end of the speech. You will also hear memorable statements referred to as clinchers, some different verbiage there. So memorable statements can be stories, quotes, questions, facts, or statistics again. And that's pretty much it. That's speech design. So of course, that's not it as far as the course goes, because there's so much more to it than that. But that's a great starting point for you there, and that's something to really get your wheels going as far as your speeches are concerned. So verbal and nonverbal messages. Here's an important question for you. So is the message only conveyed in what we say? Of course not. It's not. No, definitely not. The content of our speech is only part of the process. Nonverbal messages are just as important as the verbal messages that we speak. That's an everyday conversation. That's communication right there. All of our nonverbal behaviors, the gestures we make, the way we sit, how fast or how loud we talk, how close we stand to other people, how much eye contact we make, they all send strong messages. And that's something we always want to be aware of. These messages don't stop when you stop speaking either. So even when you're silent, you're still communicating non-verbally. I hope that you've never done this, but if you've ever given someone the silent treatment, you're conveying a message. You know that you are, even though your words are not saying anything. If you walk into a room with other people and you're not making eye contact, you decide to sit in the back of the room and you have your arms crossed, you're conveying a message that you do not feel like dealing with people at that point in time. So we always want to be aware of those nonverbal messages. With that in mind, we want to think of, what do nonverbal messages convey to our audience? These are things we're really going to dive into in the course. What happens when our verbal messages do not match our nonverbal messages? Well, that's actually an interesting question. When our verbal messages do not match our nonverbal messages, the listener generally decides to believe the nonverbal messages over the verbal messages. For example, let's say that you were having an argument with a significant other, and that person walks in the room and says, "Are you okay?" And you say, "I'm fine." Okay? And you have your arms crossed and your face is all squinched. Well, your significant other is probably going to believe the nonverbal messages you're sending off versus the verbal messages. So when the two verbal messages, or excuse me, when verbal messages and nonverbal messages contradict each other, the listener is generally going to believe the nonverbal messages over the verbal ones. So are nonverbal messages the same across cultures? No, not at all. There are so many examples out there of nonverbal messages that are things that we see as, a positive thing even in our own culture, that are not accepted nowhere near that in another culture. So we have to be aware and monitor our nonverbal messages as well, especially when we're speaking to a diverse audience. So the 7 deadly sins of public speaking. I think these are really interesting. These are actually something that you're not going to find in your textbook, but I think they are very important and things that we should discuss. There are actually 7 what we call deadly sins of public speaking. The first is failing to tell narratives or making some form of an emotional connection with our audience. When we do not personalize our message in some way and make that connection to people, we tend to lose them. The next one is when we decide to use bullet points instead of pictures on slides. And yes, I know that I'm doing this right now, but I know that you guys need this for your notes. And also, I know that sometimes ADA requirements require me to put verbiage on the slides so that, no matter what your abilities are, you're able to gather the information you need from this course. So, but in normal presentation mode, we would not use bullet points on slides. And in fact, in this class, for a lot of your speeches, you won't be using slides at all. So just kind of keep that in mind. Okay, the next deadly sin, number 3, would be putting your audience to sleep because you insist on talking too long. Obviously, in this class, we're not doing 18-minute speeches. Oh my goodness. I would never require that of you in an in an introductory public speaking course. But in a business situation, in a professional situation, 18 minutes is an ideal time to speak. Of course, that depends on what you're trying to achieve. It also depends on the environment and the situation, but just kind of a rough idea there to keep in mind. Next, thinking about your slides as an afterthought. And again, this applies to the business situation, but a lot of times people go into make presentations in the business world, or it doesn't have to be the business world, in the career world, I guess I should say. They think of those slides as an afterthought. you should really, if you're going to use some form of visual as far as technology goes, you really want to put forth the effort into that and make sure that it's top notch for your audience. If not, don't use it at all. So next, reading from your slides instead of making eye contact with your audience. You know, the same could be said for our public speaking course as well. You want to avoid reading from your note cards instead of making eye contact with your audience. Eye contact is so much more important than a lot of people understand, because when we make that eye contact, we are interacting with people on a certain nonverbal level, and we are keeping them interested in our speech. Also, just something I thought I would throw out there, a lot of times my students say, well, you know, it makes me nervous to make eye contact with people, so what I like to do is find a point in the back of the room and stare at it, or stare right at people, right above people's heads or at their forehead, and they don't know that I'm not making eye contact. Okay, what I want you to do is practice that on your own. The next time you're having a conversation with someone, do that. Stare at the back of the room or stare at their forehead. Eventually, they will turn around and go, what are you looking at? Of course, people can tell when you don't make eye contact with them. So it's important that you are striving to make short bits of eye contact with each of your audience members and never ever read in your speeches. And sin 6 and 7, not practicing. You want to practice. Without practicing, people can tell that you didn't practice. You come off as less credible, not rehearsed, and not a very responsible speaker. Okay, so the types of delivery. We're going to talk about this a lot more later on in the course, but I thought I would go ahead and mention it. There are 4 different types of delivery as far as public speaking goes. The first is memorized delivery, and that's going to be learning the speech by heart and then reciting it. I'm not sure why, but a lot of times students come in public speaking courses and they think that we memorize our speeches. Of course not. No. When we memorize things, if we forget one word of what we memorized, what's going to happen? You're going to forget the material, and then it's going to go really bad. So we never memorize our speeches. What we choose to do is extemporaneous delivery. And extemporaneous delivery is preparing a speech carefully in advance, but choosing the exact wording during the delivery. And what we do is with extemporaneous delivery is, first off, when we go to construct our speech as a whole or organize our speech, we're going to create an outline. And in each lesson, you will, or for each speech that we do in this course, you will see a sample outline that's going to help to guide you in the creation of your own outlines. But we want to start with our outlines. And in our outlines, we'll put our topic on there. We'll put our general purpose, our specific purpose, and our thesis statements. Thesis statements are also known as a central idea. And then we'll actually go into the creation of our outlines. And when we do that, if we do it well and we really put the effort into it, our speech will basically just flow off of the outline. Now, after we create the outlines, though, we want to take note cards and we want to create what we call a keyword outline. And that's basically taking the long version of your outline, condensing it into keywords and phrases, and jotting that down on your note cards and using that to prompt you while you deliver your speech. So each time that we deliver that speech, the exact wording is going to change a little bit because we're using keywords and phrases. But as long as the main points are there and we're doing what we hope to achieve in the speech, that's perfectly fine. Of course, there are two other different types of delivery here that I want to talk about as well. The first is manuscript delivery, and that's going to be reading the speech from manuscript. It says icebreaker allowed. We actually do not do that in this course. That is something that was left over on an old slide. I do apologize. But we don't use manuscript delivery. However, if you ever do decide to go into, let's say, broadcasting one day or something along those lines, news anchors use manuscript delivery a good bit. They use teleprompters. You'll see it on award shows and so forth. That's going to be manuscript delivery. And then we have impromptu delivery. This is actually something that you might use in your career. That's going to be speaking with little advanced or possibly even no preparation at all. And this is only used in the impromptu setting. For instance, if your supervisor looks at you one day and says, hey John, can you give us a quick update on whatever project you're working on at that time? Well, you might be prompted to stand up and do an impromptu little speech real quick. But with the right skills in place, it doesn't have to be very long, and It's not difficult if you understand the basics of public speaking. So dealing with anxiety. I think this is so important in our first lesson to cover because I know a lot of you come into the public speaking courses with a little bit of anxiety. So what you want to do is things to help you to deal with that anxiety is to plan a compelling introduction. When we work to create an introduction that has a strong attention getter and we preview those main points, we kind of get in the groove of the speech delivery process and our anxiety decreases a great deal. We also want to, if you can, use appropriate visual aids when possible. They can aid the audience in learning as well. And we'll talk about visual aids and tips for using visual aids at a later time, but just kind of something to throw out there. We don't want to read or recite our information. We want to deliver our speech based off of the keyword outlines on our note cards. When we choose not to read, it helps the audience to stay more engaged. So again, use keywords and phrases on your note cards. We also want to control our inner monologue, and that's going to be, we want to think positive. If you go to go to do this speech and you say, I'm not going to do well at this, I'm going to be terrible. Well, what's going to happen? You're not going to do well at this, you're going to do terrible. So we want to control that. We want to think positive. We also want to promote positivity with the audience. You want to seem confident and rehearsed and organized, because when we don't convey those things, we lose the credibility that we're striving for with our listeners. You also want to maintain a positive self-image. Like I said, give yourself a pep talk. You're going to do great. And then we want to think realistically about the assignment as well. So think about the assignment expectations, the requirements, and just make sure that you are executing that properly. Understanding communication anxiety. For me, I think that when we understand communication anxiety, it can help us to reduce it. So what is communication anxiety? Communication anxiety is, basically speaking, just unpleasant sensations you experience before or during a presentation. Now notice in that definition, I said before or during a presentation. Why do we not experience communication anxiety after the presentation? Because it's over. We don't have to do it anymore. So, we will work through communication anxiety though. Don't worry about that. So why do we get this communication anxiety? Well, a lot of times it's because we open ourselves up to the scrutiny of other people. But when we do this and we make the choice to speak publicly, it can result in personal growth. It can help you to be more confident about yourself and your ideas. It can provide self-enhancement and can be, this nervousness can even be transformed into what we call positive nervousness. And that's nervousness that actually works for us. And I'll discuss that in a minute as well. So what are the symptoms of communication anxiety? That's a good question. Anxiety as a whole is just a product of the extra adrenaline that we're releasing in our bodies. So if you've ever, and I hope this hasn't happened to you, but I'm sure it probably has, if you've ever almost rear-ended someone in a vehicle, chances are you experience that pins and needles rush. That's extra adrenaline. That's what that is. So anxiety is also the same thing. It's just an adrenaline rush. You probably will not have all of the symptoms of communication anxiety when you do your speeches, but chances are you're going to have a few of them. And if you didn't, you wouldn't be normal or even human. So keep that in mind. You're not alone with that. A little bit of communication anxiety can actually be a good thing as well. And that's what I was talking about transforming that anxiety into positive nervousness. When we have that little bit of anxiety when we're doing our speech, rather than it coming across as anxiety to our audience or listeners, it often comes off as passion about your topic. So we can transform that anxiety into positive nervousness and help it to work for us. Now, like I said, the absence of nervousness can give your audience the impression that you don't care. Now, if you're not nervous, that's not a bad thing either. That's just where passion can come in, passion about your topic, and that's why it's so important that you always choose a topic that you care about. Now, you might be thinking things as well, and I say this, and you see the quotation marks there, but it's because my students have said this over and over to me in my many, many years of public speaking teaching experiences. But you may be thinking that you're alone in your anxiety. Of course you're not. But also, a lot of my students say that they're scared of saying something stupid or sounding silly. Well, let's really think about those things. We all do that from time to time. It's okay. It's how we respond to that and how we overcome that that decides if we are using our public speaking skills to the best of our abilities. The most anxiety that we have about speaking comes before the speech actually takes place. Sometimes students work themselves up so much about their speeches that I've had students come in and tell me that they didn't sleep at all the night before because they were so nervous. Some people are not quite as bad on that level, but some people will just say, before my speech, I just got these butterflies and I didn't expect that. Well, that's a lot of worry for nothing, is what I say. This is called anticipatory anxiety, and this happens a lot when you first register for the public speaking class, or when a speech is assigned to you, or even when you're working on your speech. You get that anticipatory anxiety. You just work yourself up so much about what has to happen that you just make yourself a ball of nerves. Well, we want to try to avoid that. Understanding the causes of anxiety can help you to avoid that, in my opinion, and can help you to cope with it as well. So here's a few common symptoms of communication anxiety. A lot of times students will tell me that they're scared they're going to tremble or shake when they're doing their speeches. Well, guess what? That's very common. And as long as you never tell us that you're nervous, never apologize, we're not going to know or realize that that's what's going on. So, but here's a few things to help you. If you start trembling or shaking while you're doing your speech, you want to use gestures, okay? When we use those gestures, it's a physical movement of our body. And when we physically move our body, we're releasing that extra adrenaline that's pumping through us, which is making the trembling and shaking happen. We start to release that extra adrenaline, and the trembling and shaking will decrease. Now, by gestures, I don't mean fidgeting. So we don't want to fidget with something. We want to use controlled gestures. Also, just kind of moving around a little bit helps. Again, though, avoid fidgeting, pretty much that. Pacing, fidgeting, and so forth. Controlled gestures, meaningful movements is what we're striving for. Also, some of my students have said before that they're scared their mind's going to go blank. Well, guess what? We don't memorize our speeches. We deliver using the extemporaneous method. So that means that we prepare and practice our speech well in advance. And not only that, we include a keyword outline on our note cards. So let's say that your mind did go blank, which that doesn't really happen with my students, but let's say that it did happen to you. Well, all you have to do is look down at those note cards, get yourself back on track. And just keep in mind that your wording is going to change each time you deliver the speech. So if you forgot to say something, it's okay. We didn't know you were going to say it anyway, so just keep going. Sometimes my students say they're scared they're going to embarrass themselves. Okay, let's really think about this. What's the worst that can happen? Okay, if you start trembling, we discussed how to deal with that. Use some controlled movements and gestures, and we'll work out that extra adrenaline. You forget how you plan to say something? No big deal. It's extemporaneous, and we didn't know the exact wording you had planned anyway. If you mispronounce a word, well, there's a few things we can do with that. And we do want to try to avoid mispronunciations because it can affect your credibility. But if you just stumble over the flow of a word, for instance, I'll do a whole lecture on statistics at some point, and that is a tongue tire for me. But if we mispronounce a word, all we have to do is keep going or go back and say it one more time. Just say, excuse me, statistics, and go. So if you, what I like to call flub up a word, meaning you just messed up the word as a whole because you got tongue-tied, keep in mind that this happens to everyone. The key is not to draw attention to it. Don't be that person that says, oh my goodness, did you hear what I just said? I said whatever instead of statistics. Goodness, I can't believe that I just said that. When we do that and we're doing a speech to other people, we completely lose our credibility first and foremost. But not just that, we make a scene out of it. And that is detrimental to the speech process. So what we want to do is just repronounce the word or just keep going. Chances are no one heard you mess up that word anyway, or if they did, they knew what you meant. So, but if you just don't know how to pronounce something, that's another thing, and that will drastically affect your credibility and something we must work on before your speech. Now, sometimes my students say they're scared they're going to just be unable to continue talking. I put on here that this is very, very rare, but I want to state this. I I never exclude anything because you just never know. But this has never happened to any of my students, and I've had thousands of public speaking students by now. Trust me, never happened to any of my students. So just kind of keep that in mind. But if this does happen to you and you are my rarity and you're just unable to continue talking, take a moment, calm yourself down for a second, and just keep going. That's it. You'll be fine. Another tip is to find a friendly face in the room, glance at them for a second, and just keep going. That helps as well. And remember that the speech will be over soon. It only takes, you know, anywhere from 3 to probably 7 minutes on a speech, if that. So just something to keep in mind. So what this course asks of you? Well, it asks several things of you, but a few things I want to talk about here is respect for the integrity of ideas and information. I want you to learn how to speak responsibly. I want you to know the main points of your topic, know them well, be researched, and be knowledgeable on those things. I want you to understand what experts believe. Be aware of recent events or discoveries concerning your topic, and realize that what you say can be repeated, so don't pass on faulty information. Be a responsible speaker and possess responsible knowledge. You also want to, or I would like you to, carefully use the quotes that we decide to use in our speeches. Always be correct with our quotes. Never quote out of context. And whenever you do quote someone directly in a speech or even paraphrase their information, you have to attribute the words to that person. We also want to avoid academic dishonesty, and that's going to be cheating and plagiarism. And I'm sure that you all know the definitions of those words, so, just make sure that you're doing your own work, and you're going to do great in this course. I know that. So with that being said, that wraps up Lesson 1, Lecture 1. If you do have any questions or comments or concerns, you can always send me an email in the course. Otherwise, welcome to the course, and I know you're going to do fantastic. Thank you so much.